Hello, welcome to another Ins and Outs of Probate for Genealogists. This is one in a series of 9 videos which are located on the Brigham Young University YouTube channel. This particular episode is number 6 and it is entitled, Where Do I Find Probate Documents? Probate documents can become quite a challenge. First of all, the probate actions generate a series of documents that are filed with the court handling the probate action. And all of these probate documents or pleadings filed with the court are preserved, and they're preserved by the courts. Understanding that the courts do not preserve probate documents because of interest by genealogists. They're preserved because of legal implications of the transfer of the property from the probate to the heirs. In each of those circumstances, there may be taxes or other interests involved. If real property is involved in probate action and transferred from the probate estate, that is the decedent, to the heirs, then that probate estate property is handled like any other real property. But the transfer of the property may be subject to questions, and so the probate files are generally preserved in order to provide future insurance that the land can be cleared of any title claims. The first question you need to answer in finding a probate file is the jurisdiction. This word means the type of case handled by a particular court, and that may be divided either by the district, county, or the nature of the claim or controversy. So, for example, finding out which of the courts within the particular jurisdiction, particular area, had jurisdiction over the probate action is one of the challenges. Currently, it's fairly simple. You would need to look up the area where the decedent died, and it's very possible that the court system in that state is clearly defined as to which court handles probate matters. But as you go back in time, it may become more of a challenge because of the different ways that probate actions were assigned out to different courts. There are 2 types of jurisdiction out there under the law. One is called subject matter jurisdiction, and the other one is the location jurisdiction. So, for example, the idea of a subject matter jurisdiction means where would in what court would a probate action be filed? That's meaning that the subject of the action was a probate. It may also be determined by different considerations about where the decedent died or where the property was located. That would be called locational jurisdiction. So a court can have a specific geographical location where it has jurisdiction. For example, there might be a county court, and the county court is only jurisdiction or can only make rulings within that county. Or it may be a statewide court, in which case the court may have what's called statewide jurisdiction, meaning they can make rulings concerning actions anywhere in the state. It's also important to understand that probate law and procedures change over time, and they will continue to change. So in order to understand the probate law and the changes that have occurred in a file which may affect your ancestors, you need to know the history, a little brief history at least, of the probate law in your area of research. So if you're looking in the East, in New England perhaps, you'll find probate goes back to the earliest years in the 1600s. However, at that point in time they were being handled by the English courts, obviously, because the colonies were part of England or Britain. And then in later years you would need to know how or when the probate court changed from one court to another, or from one area of jurisdiction, meaning the geographic jurisdiction of the court. This is kind of restating it in a different way, that the names and the jurisdictions, meaning the areas of which the court had or could make rulings, have changed over time. So this is something that you need to be aware of. Now here's some examples of some different probate courts throughout the United States, meaning the names change. In Arizona, they're called the Arizona Superior Court, and it's the probate division of the Superior Court. In Utah, they're called district courts, and there's a probate district court. In California, they're called superior courts. They have jurisdiction over probate. Wisconsin, once again, they're called circuit courts. In Texas, they're called the probate court. In Pennsylvania, they're called the courts of common pleas. And in Tennessee, they're called chancery courts. So depending on the area of the United States, the way that the probate court is handled and the jurisdiction of the court, meaning which court had the right to handle probate matters, not only varies in the way that the matters are handled by that particular court, but they also vary because the names of the courts change from state to state. So where would you go to look for probate files? Where are these files? First of all, you need the name, the jurisdiction, and the location of the records, and that may have changed over time. Secondly, you need to track down the documents that can be a real challenge. Tracking those documents down can be a real challenge. And they may actually be in paper form sitting in the basement of some courthouse someplace in the United States. Although there is a tremendous effort going forward to digitize and make records available online, that may be different between two counties. One county in the state may have their records digitized, whereas another county in the same state may still have paper records stored in boxes someplace in the courthouse or elsewhere. Determining where the court, which court had jurisdiction, meaning which court is going to be the one where the action was filed and heard by the probate judge or commissioner. There are several different considerations. In the first case, you need to look in the court where the decedent died. So whatever courts had jurisdiction at the time of the decedent's death where they lived, those are the ones that you would begin to look in. Secondly, you would look in a court where the decedent resided, if that was someplace else besides where they died. Usually residence means permanent residence, where they had a house or post office address, or were declared to be a resident of a particular area. You can also check in a court where the decedent owned property. In some cases, probates were filed, had to be filed in other jurisdictions where the probate owned real property. Also, you check in a court where the heirs reside. In some cases, they may have filed the probate where the heirs lived simply for convenience purposes. In many cases, if the decedent owned land in more than one state, it was necessary to file what's called an ancillary probate. That's a probate filed in a court where the property is located, and that's usually in a state other than the one where the decedent lived or even where the decedent died. An ancillary probate is not a full probate action. It's based on the filings in the court where the original probate was filed. There are a variety of steps to finding a probate case file, and I suggest the following steps. First of all, determine the date of death of the ancestor. The more specific the date can be, the better the easier it's going to be to find the probate file. But necessarily you need to know at least the year. If not, if you only have a range of years in which the probate was filed, in which the person died, then finding the probate file may involve searching through multiple years of court records. Important to determine the exact place of death. The place of death can often determine whether or not where a probate action could be filed, and even whether or not a probate action was necessary. Important to investigate and determine which of the courts or other entity handled the probate matters at the time and place of the ancestor's death. Those kinds of historical facts are quite readily discoverable. Most states have a history of their court system in some form or another, and by going through that history you can determine at what time period different courts handled the probate actions. In addition, you need to determine where the surviving records are stored. Even though the probate may have been handled in a particular court, that does not mean that the records are still in that court, or that they aren't stored someplace in a state archive, in a central location for the courts in that state, or someplace else that in a library, museum, or a library, or whatever. It is also important to determine whether or not the records are available online in a digitized format, and you may need to search several online databases to determine if they have probate records for a particular location. Next, it's important to search the court or other entity records both before and for a time period after the death of the ancestor. You can really find that the probate actions could be filed up to years after the date of death. Sometimes the heirs simply did not take any action to probate the estate until some event, such as the sale of the real property, required a probate, and that could have happened years after the person actually died. So my rule, of course, is that you look for probate records from the date of death until the present, but that's a little excessive, at least until the possibility of finding after years and years is not available. It's also important to check with the following other areas. Be sure and check the court where the probate action may have been filed at the time of the decedent, but in addition to that, you need to check adjoining counties and courts. It's always possible that the probate was filed in an adjoining county for whatever reason. Perhaps the probate judge was a relative of the deceased, or a friend, or even an enemy, and they may have been required to file the action in an adjoining county simply to avoid a conflict. It's also possible that as I mentioned a moment ago, that the records have been transferred to a state archives, a library, or historical society. They may even be in a university special collections department in the library of a university. And always check online. Now, it's couple of places that seem unrelated to probate but are good places to check for probate records is the newspapers. Many of the procedures for probates required notices to be posted, and it was most common for those notices to be posted in a newspaper. So search all the newspapers in the county. I recommend looking on the Library of Congress, that's loc.gov, G-O-V, newspaper project for a list of all of the newspapers published in a particular county from the beginning of the county until the present. It's also important to research land and property records. If you're searching for deeds and you're going through the land and property records concerning your ancestors' property, and you find a deed that is designated an executor's or administrator's deed, then these deeds indicate that there has been a probate action filed, and it is then appropriate to start looking at the time and place indicated by the deed for the probate. Even if you aren't looking for land and property records, it's important to see how the real property of your ancestors was transferred at the time of their death. It may have been transferred through an estate, And knowing that the time of death can be it'd be helpful in determining where to begin looking into the land and property records to find a transfer that apparently goes to an heir. This may have also happened shortly before the decedent passed away, so land records you should also look for transfers of property that may have occurred before you believe that the ancestor died. Okay, well, thanks for watching this segment, and hopefully you'll tune in for the next and following segments in this probate series.